All right, so with lesson 3 here, we're going to talk about absolute value equations. The absolute value of a number is the distance that number is away from zero. So that's why the absolute value of -5, well, from zero, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's why the absolute value of -5 is always 5. And the absolute value of +5 will also be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So the absolute value of 5 is 5 because it's 5 units away from zero. But the absolute value of -5 is also 5 because it is 5 units away from zero. We're talking about a distance there. All right. So kind of using that logic then, so let's consider the following here. So if I have the absolute value of x equals 7, what could go for x then? Well, kind of based on what we just did, well then x could be 7 because the absolute value of 7 is 7, or x could be -7 because the absolute value of -7 is also 7. So when you're solving absolute value equations then, this should make you realize there will be two solutions each time, okay? And the only really caveat on that is if it was ever equal to 0, because if absolute value is the distance from 0 and you're on 0, then you're not gonna really have any distance whatsoever. But for the most part, with absolute value, you're always gonna have two solutions or two cases. And so what they're saying down here is when you have an absolute value and it's equal to something, then what you're going to do is you need to have two cases. So the first time you're going to set it equal to whatever that number is. The second time you're going to set it equal to negative that number. Okay. So you always basically, all right, so here's my steps to solving an absolute value problem. Absolute, so we need to absolute or isolate the absolute value expression. So that means get the absolute value completely by itself. And then you're going to rewrite both equations, setting one equal to the positive c and the other equal to the negative c. And then you're going to solve the two equations. Okay. So let's take a look at the first example. All right, so first off, basically isolate the absolute value expression. So that means I want to get absolute value by itself on one side and everything else on the other. Check, we've done that. Now we're going to write our two cases. The first one, we're just going to drop the absolute value and write it exactly the way we see it. X minus 5 equals 9. Or the other one would be, same thing, the absolute value part stays the same, but it could equal -9, okay? So whatever was on the inside could be +9, or whatever was on the inside could equal -9. And that's going to give me the same thing. And now you literally just solve this like two completely separate problems. So if I add 5 over, I'm going to get x could be 14. And then I'm going to add 5 over, x could be -4. Either of those answers will work, okay? And then just like anything else, you could always check yourself. So if I plug in a 14, 14 minus 5 is 9. Absolute value of 9 is 9. Check, it works. -4, well, -4 minus 5 would be -9. The absolute value of -9 is also +9. So it works. All right, questions there? All right, so I'm going to work through the remaining examples. At any point, feel free to pause, you work it out, and then play so you can check yourself. Okay. So number 2, same thing, get absolute value by itself. Perfect, check. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to set up our two cases. I got -6x plus 8 equals 13. Or -6x plus 8 equals -13. Okay. And now the same thing as before. I'm going to solve my two cases. So I got negative 6x. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 8 over, which gives me 5. And then if I divide by negative 6, I'm going to get x is equal to negative 5 over 6. Okay. All right, same thing on this one. If I subtract my 8 over, I'm going to get negative 6x is equal to negative 21 divided by negative 6 divided by negative 6. And x is going to turn out to be, well, 21 over 6. If I reduce that fraction, is going to become 7 over 2. All right. And then if you want to, you can check yourself. All right. Same thing over here. Just because they're fractions, do I do anything any differently? Not at all. Okay. So I'm going to set up my two cases. The first one would be 1/3 x minus 7/3 is equal to 5. The other one's going to be 1/3 x minus 7/3 equals negative 5. All right. And then same thing, we're just going to do our math. I'm going to add 7/3 over. So 5 plus 7/3, math to a fraction. So I've got 1/3 x is equal to 22/3. And then to get rid of the 1/3, I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 3. So that way they cancel. So x is going to turn out, well, then that side cancels. So that gives me 22. So there's one answer. And then same thing here. I'm going to add the 7/3 over. So negative 5 plus 7/3, math to a frac. So I got 1/3 x equals negative 8/3. Same thing, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. That way they cancel. And x is going to be a negative 8. Okay. You with me so far? So just because they're fractions doesn't mean I do anything any differently. And then I do have a calculator in which to kind of help me along in the process. Okay. Now, number 4 is a little different to start with. Okay. Number 4 is a little different to start with. Because unlike the other ones, the absolute value is already by itself. So on number 4, I got negative 4 plus 3, absolute value of a minus 10 is equal to 9. Okay, so remember what the first step was to solve absolute value expressions. I needed to get the absolute value by itself. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 4 to the other side. So I'm going to add 4. So I'm going to kind of treat this just like where this is like my big old variable. That's my x right there. I'm trying to get this by itself. So I'm going to add 4 over, and I get 3a minus 10 is equal to, what is that? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. Now, once again, I want to get absolute value by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 3. So I've got a minus 10 is equal to 13/3. Okay. You with me so far? Now, and then don't forget I had my absolute value. So now this looks like what we've been doing. Okay. We have now gotten the absolute value by itself. So that was goal number 1. All right. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and solve it like we always do. So I'm going to do a minus 10 equals 13/3, and a minus 10 is equal to negative 13/3. So if I add 10 over, add 10, a is equal to And like I said, you guys, I mean, you'll have a calculator, no big deal here. 13/3 plus 10, math to a fraction is 43/3. Okay, done there. Over here, if I add 10, I'm going to have negative 13/3 plus 10, math to a fraction. So on this side, A turns out to be 17/3. So here are my two answers. Okay. So like I said, pretty much doing the same thing we've been doing. The first thing we had to do though was to get the absolute value by itself. All right, let's look at number 5. Same thing on number 5. And once again, always, like I said, if you're following along on the video, because in class, I'm going to stop and make sure that you're trying these on your own. But for those of you that are learning virtually, then you could always just stop the video and solve the problem out and then start it to make sure you did it right. All right, same thing. I'm trying to get this by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract that 5 over. So I've got 2m, not the 5, subtract that 4 over. So if I subtract 4, that's going to give me equal to 1. All right. And then once again, step number 1, I want to get this absolute value all by itself. So let me get rid of that 1/2. When I get rid of 1/2, I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 2 because 2.5 will cancel. And I got absolute value of 2m minus 5 is equal to 2. All right. Now that I have my absolute value by itself, then we're going to do just like we've been doing. And I'm going to set my pieces equal to each other. All right, so I've got absolute value of 2m minus 5. And I don't know why I put the absolute value signs because I don't need them anymore because I'm doing my 2 cases. So I got this equals 2, and then 2m minus 5 equals negative 2. So if I add the 5 over, 2m equals 7, divide by 2, and m is going to be 7/2. And then over here, if I add my 5 over, I get 2m is equal to 3. And then if I divide by 2, m is going to be 3/2. So what are my answers? 7/2 and 3/2. All right. Let's look at number 6. Now, number 6, I've got absolute value of 2w minus 6 plus 7 is equal to 3. And if I subtract my 7 over first, I'm going to get the absolute value of 2w minus 6 is equal to negative 4. Now, technically, I can stop there on this one. All right. Anybody know why I can stop there on this one? Well, if you noticed, your absolute value should always be a positive number. Let me go back to what we did first. The absolute value of 5 was positive 5. The absolute value of negative 5 was also positive 5. Absolute value should always equal a positive number because it's the distance from 0. And remember, distance, even though we're going backwards, it's still the distance is 5, or the distance that way was 5. So absolute value, kind of the whole point of this, is absolute value should always be positive. So anytime that you get absolute value is equal to a negative number, then you know this is going to be no solution. Okay? All right. You know it's no solution. Now, let me show you this. what if I kept going? Okay. So what if I didn't recognize and I kept going? So 2w minus 6, negative 4. So if I do my two cases, I got 2w minus 6 equals negative 4, and 2w minus 6 equals positive 4. Add, so 2w is going to be 2, and then divide, so w equals 1. Over here, if I add over, I'm going to get 2w equals 10, and then divide by 2, w equals 5. Okay, so you would say that, all right, there's my answers. And I've been kind of skipping this step because, you know I'm right. So, but if you remember, you're supposed to go back and check your answers. So if I plugged a 1 in to the original, I would have absolute value of 2 times 1 minus 6 plus 7, and that's supposed to equal 3. Well, 2 times 1 is 2, minus 6 would be the absolute value of negative 4, plus 7 equals 3. Well, the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4, and 4 plus 7 would be what? 11. 11 does not equal 3. So that's why 1 doesn't work. Now, if I did the same thing, absolute value 2 times 5 minus 6 plus 7 equals 3. So I got 10 minus 6 would be 4 plus 7 equals 3. 4 plus 7 equals 3. 11 does not equal 3. So that's why this is no solution. Okay. That would be why this one is no solution. But if you had realized that when you got absolute value equal to a negative number, then you could have saved yourself a lot of time and just said no solution. All right. Let's take a look at the last 3 there then. Let's take a look. So number 7, absolute value of negative 2n plus 6 is equal to 6. So I got negative 2n plus 6 equals 6. Negative 2n plus 6 equals negative 6. All right, subtract this. So negative 2n equals 0. So n would be 0. Over here, negative 2n. If I subtract the 6 over, I'm going to get negative 12 divided by negative 2. And n turns out to be positive 6. Now, if you checked your answers, 0 plus 6, absolute value of 6 is 6. Negative 12 plus 6 would be negative 6. Absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. So it works. Number 8, I've got 3 minus absolute value of 8x minus 6 is equal to 3. So remember, you always don't do your 2 cases yet. You've always got to get the absolute value by itself first. And so if I subtract my 3 over, I get negative absolute value of 8x minus 6 is equal to 0. And then we kind of imagine that being a negative 1. So if I go ahead and divide everything by negative 1, now I'm going to get the absolute value of 8x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now, if you think about what I talked about earlier, this is the only special case. When the number's 0, we're only going to have one solution. Because if you think about it, if I try to do 8x minus 6 equals negative 0, well, isn't positive 0 and negative 0 really the same thing, which is just 0? So that's why this is the only case where, and if I reduce my fraction, then I'm going to have just one answer. Okay? Where I would just have one solution. All right. And last but not least on this section, we got 2 minus 5, 5m minus 5 equals negative 73. And like I said, I kind of imagine that just being one big old variable right there. So imagine this being a big old x. I want to get that by itself. So I'm going to subtract my 2 from both sides. So negative 5, absolute value of 5m minus 5 is equal to negative 75. All right. Now I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. So absolute value of 5m minus 5 is equal to 15. Okay. So like I said, clean it up and always get the absolute value by itself first. Now we can do our two cases. So 5m minus 5 equals 15, and 5m minus 5 is equal to negative 15. So I've got 5m equals 20. So m equals 4. And then I got 5m equals, if I add 5 over, that'd be negative 10. So m is going to be negative 2. So what are my solutions? It's 4 and negative 2. All right. Questions on solving absolute value equations.